Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Von Manor, where Roger and I have returned with a video a little less pulpy than usual. Don't worry, the pulp will return on Friday when I talk about my favorite occult detective. But today, we're getting classy. As if Roger and I could possibly get any classier than we already are. Today, we're talking about Penguin classics. I love Penguin classics. Like so many people here on BookTube, I love Penguin classics. Penguin classics, they're my favorite classics reprint house. Although it is true, sometimes Oxford does it better on certain editions, but that's pretty rare. Usually Penguin's the best, I think. And so I'm talking about Penguin classics today. Some Penguin classics that I'm planning on reading. I've got a TBR shelf over there, which is a total mess, so you'll never see it because it's a total mess. But I've been talking about some of the books that I'm planning on reading in the future that are sitting over there on the shelf. And I do have a pile of Penguin classics over there that I'm intending on reading. So let's talk about the next 15 Penguin classics that I'm planning on reading. Not necessarily in the order I'll be reading them in, but they're the ones that are on the shelf, so these are the ones I'll be reading next. And the first one I'm going to talk about is one that I know I'm going to be reading in December because of Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. My pal Roger here, he has his own book club. The cheapest book club around because everything he picks each month, all the books are in the public domain, including this one. Although I will be reading in December the Penguin Classics edition of this book, and this is Wilkie Collins with No Name. Wilkie Collins, the famous author of The Moonstone and The Woman in White. The Woman in White is my favorite Wilkie Collins book out of the Wilkie Collins books I've read. I love that book. I have a Penguin Classics hardcover that I've read twice. But I've never read No Name, and this is supposed to be one of his better books. He has some books that are not so good. He has some books that are really good. And this, I have heard, is one of his really good ones. So I'm looking forward to No Name in December. Wilkie Collins. And this particular style of Penguin Classics, I love, with the outline there and the black spine with the colored top. These are the Penguin Classics when they looked like this. This is when I first discovered these, and when I first started reading Penguin, is when they had this jacket style. So, cool. Wilkie Collins, No Name. I'll be reading this in December for sure. But I have a big pile of other ones that I'll be reading. And this book is one of my favorite books. I've read this in multiple editions and multiple translations. This is still my favorite translation of this book. And this is Homer's The Iliad. Homer's The Iliad. And this is one of the earliest Penguin classics. I think the very first Penguin classic that was published was Homer, and it was the Odyssey, I believe. But this was another early one. This is not a first printing. This is a fourth printing of this book. Still, it's a very early translation of the Iliad by E.V. Rue. E.V. Rue did the translation of this. Now, later on, this translation was updated. And it was revised by E.V. Rue's son. I'm sure all the revisions, whatever they were, they were all done for a reason. But this particular edition is the original edition that was published by Penguin. So it does not contain those revisions. This is exactly as it was translated by E.V. Rue, which I don't think is available anymore. I think if you get the Rue translation now, and you can get it, I think it's the one with the revisions that were done by his son. So this is the original, and like I said, it's my favorite translation. It's just a very clear, very simple prose translation of this book. And if you've never read the Iliad, this is a good way to experience for the first time the story of the Iliad from Homer. So I'll be reading that one. Pretty easy to guess which one I'll be reading next, which is this one, the Odyssey. And Again, the older style with the border around the picture there on the cover. This was one that was revised by D.C.H. Rue, E.V. Rue's son. So it's not the original version, which I've never actually found a copy of. Still fantastic. And this is just like Rue's translation is my favorite for the Iliad, it's my favorite for the Odyssey as well. The Odyssey, which was the very first Penguin classic ever published, I believe. So, yeah, of course, I gotta follow the Iliad with the Odyssey. Of course I do. Now, this next one is a book everybody on BookTube has told me I need to read. Most recently, Steve Donahue did a video. It was a starter kit for the Victorians. And he talked about this book. And this made me think, yeah, this needs to be up there on the shelf. Because I do need to read this book. Everybody says so. This is Middlemarch by George Eliot. Middlemarch by George Eliot. A pretty good-sized Victorian novel that I hear nothing but good things about. So yeah, I need to read it. It's a pretty good size. What is it, 600 pages? Something like that? 800 pages. Never mind, it's 800 pages. It's big, this one, but it's supposed to be great. Now you'll notice that this is the newest jacket style for Penguin Classics. They widened the strip there across and made the penguin easier to see. I suspect they did that because a lot of penguins are sold now online and you have these tiny little pictures. And if you were just to, type in Middlemarch, you will see a gazillion editions of this pop up on your screen. And a lot of cheapo publishers now design their covers to look like they're penguins when they're really not. So with the wider stripe and the bigger penguin and the bolder print, I think it's easier to tell that this is a genuine penguin when you're ordering online. I suspect that's why they made this change, although I am not certain. That's just me guessing. It's a speculation. I'm speculating. But Middlemarch, have to read it. Everybody says I need to read it, so I'm going to read it. This next one is a Joseph Conrad book, and I really like Joseph Conrad a lot. I've liked everything I've read from Joseph Conrad. And this is Victory, and I've never read this book. From what I've read about this book, it's not considered one of his best, but I figure everything Joseph Conrad wrote is probably worth reading. And who knows what I'll think of it. I might just love it, so we'll see. Joseph Conrad, Victory. This is a 20th Century Classics edition, which they don't make anymore. Now, if you were to get Victory, it would just be a standard black spine classic from Penguin, I believe. But this is an old Penguin 20th Century Classics edition of Victory. So, looking forward to that one by Joseph Conrad. Now, this next one is a book I read. It was a long time ago. I'm trying to remember when I read this book. It might have been high school. The last time I read this book might have been high school. My goodness. This is Raphael Sabatini's Captain Blood, which I became interested at a young age in this story because I saw the movie, and I saw the movie a lot. It was like always on television when I was a kid. The Errol Flynn Captain Blood, which was, I recommend that film. And so I found the book, and I believe it was in my high school library. Although it's possible it was in my regular library, and I was a little older, but I think I was in high school. And I have this Penguin Classics edition just ready to be read, and I probably should read it because it's been a day or two since I've been in high school. It's been a little while. So yeah, I have to read Sabatini's Captain Blood once again. Pirate fun. Have to read that. Next, here is an author that I want to revisit, but I don't necessarily feel like reading everything he wrote. But this volume looks really interesting, and it has a good selection of his work, and that is the Portable Edgar Allan Poe. The Portable Edgar Allan Poe, edited by Gerald Kennedy. Penguin published a few of these portable volumes, which offer a selection of different writings from specific authors. And they're usually pretty good. The Joseph Conrad one was really good. But I haven't read the Edgar Allan Poe one yet. And it has a lot of good stuff. It has a really good selection of his stories. Has all, as far as the tales are concerned, they're most of the stories that you would expect. Fall of the House of Usher, Pit and the Pendulum, Mask of the Red Death, and a bunch of others. But it also has a lot of poems and a lot of letters are included. Like a whole selection of letters. And we have a section called Observations, which is just a bunch of other stuff that Edgar Allan Poe wrote. So this is a good selection of different writings, the different stuff that Edgar Allan Poe wrote. So I'm looking forward to reading this volume. It should be excellent. I wonder why they don't have a portable H.P. Lovecraft. Penguin, you should make a portable H.P. Lovecraft where you could just have a selection of his stories, because he wrote tons of letters and a bunch of other stuff. Penguin, you should make a portable H.P. Lovecraft. S.T. Joshi would love to do it, I'm sure. Penguin's not watching this, but this I'm really looking forward to reading. The portable Edgar Allan Poe. That should be really cool. Next, Mark at Book Time with Elvis keeps telling everybody to read this book because it's his favorite book, and that is this one, Jerome K. Jerome's Three Men in a Boat. This Penguin edition also has Three Men on the Bummel. I never hear anything about the Bummel, but I'm always hearing about the boat. Sometimes sequels, you know, they just don't measure up to the original. I'm not sure if that's true in this case, but I'll read them both, the boat and the Bummel. Three Men in a Boat, Jerome K. Jerome. Looking forward to that. Next, this book is very, very large. But I am not frightened by gigantic books, not much anyway, and I have read this book once before, but I read the Oxford edition. This translation from Penguin, I hear, is actually more complete. I hear that the Oxford edition, as huge as it was, might have been missing some things. I'm not sure if that's true, but that's what I hear. And this is Alexandre Dumas, The Count of Monte Cristo, which is a book I loved when I read it. And this translation is by Robin Buss, and this book is gigantic. And this is supposed to be the most complete edition from what I hear. And so, of course, I have to read it. I've never read this translation, really want to get to it. It's gigantic. It'll take a long time to read, but I don't care. I want to read it. Next, Apollonius of Rhodes, Jason and the Argonauts. Again, I've never read this translation of Jason and the Argonauts. It looks fantastic. Look at that great cover. Penguin, sometimes they do a really good job on their covers. And this, of course, tells the story about the quest for the Golden Fleece. You might have seen the movie Jason and the Argonauts, which was totally awesome with the skeletons and the harpies and all that stuff going on. This is, of course, the very, very old 3rd century BC edition of Apollonius of Rhodes, Jason and the Argonauts. This is the original. And again, this translation is by Aaron Puchigan. Probably mispronouncing that as usual. Sorry about that, but I've heard good things, and so I'm looking forward to reading that. Now, this next book, I've read stories from this author in different anthologies, but I've never read the books that are included in this volume. I was kind of surprised to see this as a Penguin classic, but I was pleasantly surprised because this guy is a talented writer. I can tell that just from the pieces that I read. This is Thomas Ligotti, and this is Songs of a Dead Dreamer and Grim Scribe. So this is a fairly well-known writer of weird stories. And he's even more well-known now since this edition was published, Ligotti's Songs of a Dead Dreamer and Grim Scribe. I hear a lot of good things about these books. Kind of surprised I haven't read this yet. I guess I was always too busy reading other things, but it's on my shelf to read Thomas Ligotti's Songs of a Dead Dreamer and Grim Scribe. So this should be awesome. I'm going to read that. This next one is another creepy one, which I haven't read yet. Another one I was happy to see in the Penguin Classics. This is Ray Russell's The Case Against Satan. And this was supposed to be highly influential on the novels The Exorcist and perhaps even Rosemary's Baby. It's that kind of thing. Ray Russell's The Case Against Satan. This one is very small. This should take no time at all to read. It's supposed to be really good. I have read Ray Russell before, but I've never read this, so looking forward to that. And again, great cover design. They did a good job on that cover. Next is a penguin that in this case is not a penguin, because this is a Viking edition of The Histories of Herodotus, translated by Tom Holland. So even though this one's published by Viking, this became Penguin's bigger edition of Herodotus. So if you were to get the deluxe edition, that's what it's called. I was like, what was it called? It's the deluxe edition. If you were to get Penguin's deluxe edition of Herodotus, this is the edition that you get, at least at this time. You know, any time they might have another translation of Herodotus show up, but for right now, this is Penguin's deluxe edition version. This translation by Tom Holland, which I've heard very mixed things about. I did read the first book of the 9 books in here just to get a taste of the translation, and it seemed to me to be fairly good, if at times a little odd. A lot of people hate this translation. A lot of people really like this translation. And I wonder if a lot of the hate that it gets is due to the fact that Tom Holland is a writer of popular history and novels. So he's not a scholar. So, like I said, he writes popular histories and he's written novels. He writes fun stuff. And so he translated this edition of Herodotus. He loves Herodotus, though. Tom Holland does love it. So I'm interested in reading this whole thing so I could properly judge it. It's been years since this came out. When did this translation originally come out? I bought it right away, and then I just didn't read it right away. This came out in 2013, so it's 10 years old. That's hard to believe. It's hard to believe this came out 10 years ago. But still, it's still, as far as I know, the deluxe edition of Penguin's Herodotus. This is the translation you'd get. So I really want to read that. This next book is not just one Penguin classic, it's 3. It's 3 in 1. What a bargain. But I want to revisit all of these works. And this is the Bronte Sisters. The Bronte Sisters. Look at this beautiful book. I mean, you just want to pick it up and read it because it's just so darn pretty. Look at this. What a wonderful edition of this, or of these books. So we've got Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, which is a book I want to read again anyway because I loved it. I love that book. That's my favorite Bronte book. Then we've got, of course, Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, which is a darker book than you might expect, and a book that I consider to be a horror novel. It's interesting, but when I read it, it really blew me away because it was completely different than I expected it to be. It was a much different book. Very dark book with terrible characters. You hate everybody in the book. I did anyway. They were all terrible. But so good. At the same time, it's so good. So, Wuthering Heights. And then we have Agnes Grey. What? Oh. It's the mailman. It's the mailman, Rhonda. Or do you just not like Agnes Grey? Do you think this is the wrong choice for this book? Anne Bronte's Agnes Grey is the third book in here, which I read once and I thought was okay. But I was so young when I read it that when I read it now, I'll probably like it a lot better. I don't think I was in the frame of mind when I read this to really appreciate that one. So we'll see. But yeah, I mean, look at this. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And I love the Brontes. So I want to read those. And then this last one is really, 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 really big. And it is often been cited as being the very first novel. And I have not read it. It's this one. This is the deluxe edition of the Tale of Genji. The Tale of Genji, which is translated by Royal Tyler. Royal Tyler translated this, and it's huge. And it's supposed to be a kind of a challenging read, I believe, aside from the fact that it's enormous. But I really want to read it. Again, it's one of those books that I've heard good things about. I've heard that if you do read this thing, that it's worthwhile. Of course, I do not DNF books. So once I start this sucker, I'm going to finish it, no matter how huge it is. So yeah, The Tale of Genji. I will get to this one of these days. It's up there on my messy shelf. That's all for today. Catch me for Epic Comic Book Wednesday. I should have that up on Wednesday. And on Friday, I should have my favorite occult detective. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.